In 1838, a boy shocked the world by speaking flawless Latin, a language he'd never studied. His voice carried the weight of centuries, as if Rome itself spoke through him. Who was this child, and why did the most powerful minds of the era, scholars, priests, and skeptics, rush to confront him? The answers will unravel a mystery that challenges everything you thought you knew about history, language, and the human mind. Stick with me as I dive into this strange tale and reveal the truth behind who responded to this impossible boy. It was a chilly autumn morning in 1838 when I first heard the whispers about a boy in a small European village. His name was Elias, barely 10 years old, with eyes that seemed to hold secrets older than the hills. Villagers claimed he spoke Latin, not just phrases, but perfect, flowing sentences, as if Cicero himself had possessed him. I was a young scholar then, skeptical but curious, drawn to this anomaly. How could a child, uneducated in the classics, recite Virgil with precision? I packed my bags and set out to see him for myself. The journey was long, through muddy roads and dense forests, but the rumors grew louder with every mile. They said Elias didn't just speak Latin. He answered questions in it, questions no child should understand. When I arrived, the village was buzzing, a mix of awe and fear in the air. The local priest had already declared it a miracle, while others whispered of darker forces. I found Elias in a modest schoolhouse, surrounded by books he couldn't possibly have read. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, almost otherworldly, reciting passages from the Aeneid without a single mistake. I stood frozen, my notebook forgotten in my hand. Who was teaching this boy? And why did his words feel like they came from another time? The first to respond to Elias was Father Anselm, the village priest, a man of deep faith but limited learning. He believed Elias was touched by divine grace, a vessel for God's voice in a world drifting from faith. I watched Anselm question the boy in Latin, his hands trembling as he clutched his rosary. Elias replied with ease, quoting scripture in a dialect unused for centuries. Anselm's face paled. He muttered about miracles, but seemed unnerved by the boy's fluency. I noted the priest's unease. His faith was shaken, not strengthened, by Elias's responses. The villagers, too, were divided. Some knelt in reverence, others avoided the boy's gaze. I couldn't blame them. There was something unsettling about a child speaking a dead language with such authority. I asked Elias where he learned it, and he only smiled, saying, "It's always been with me." That night, I wrote to my mentor in Oxford, urging him to come. This was no parlor trick. It was a phenomenon that demanded scrutiny. The priest's reaction was just the beginning. More would come, and they wouldn't all be so reverent. Word of Elias spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of Professor Heinrich Voss, a renowned philologist from Berlin. Voss was a giant in academic circles, known for his work on ancient languages and his disdain for superstition. I met him when he arrived, his stern face set with determination to debunk what he called village nonsense. He tested Elias with complex Latin texts, expecting the boy to falter. Instead, Elias not only read them but corrected Voss's pronunciation with a gentle smile. I saw the professor's confidence crack. His notes scattered as he scribbled furiously. He muttered about impossible fluency and demanded to know Elias's sources. The boy's response was a line from Ovid, delivered with a knowing look that left Voss speechless. I felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the realization that this child was no ordinary prodigy. Voss left the village shaken, promising to return with colleagues. His reaction wasn't just scholarly curiosity. It was fear, thinly veiled. The boy's Latin was too perfect, too ancient, as if it bypassed centuries of linguistic drift. Next came Dr. Claire Merton, a linguist from Paris, with a reputation for unraveling mysteries. I admired her work on forgotten dialects, so I was eager to see her confront Elias. She arrived with a stack of manuscripts, her eyes sharp with skepticism. She spoke to Elias in Latin, throwing in obscure grammatical forms to trip him up. He answered flawlessly, even engaging her in a debate about Pliny's natural history. I watched Claire's composure fray as Elias quoted texts she'd only seen in dusty archives. She whispered to me later that his accent matched no known regional variation. It was pure, she said, like Latin from Rome's golden age. I asked her what that meant, and she shook her head, unable to explain. The villagers now gathered daily, some calling Elias a saint, others a demon. Clara's reaction fascinated me. She wasn't just puzzled, she was haunted by the implications. If Elias's Latin was authentic, it challenged everything we knew about language acquisition. The fifth responder was a skeptic named Thomas Reed, a journalist from London known for exposing frauds. I didn't trust his motives. He seemed more interested in headlines than truth, but his presence drew crowds. Reed interrogated Elias with rapid-fire questions, mixing Latin with Greek to confuse him. Elias didn't flinch, answering in both languages, with equal ease. I saw Reed's smirk fade as the boy recited a passage from Tacitus, then translated it into flawless English. The journalist's notebook filled with frantic scrawls, but he found no evidence of trickery. I caught him staring at Elias, his bravado replaced by unease. "This isn't natural," he muttered to me, refusing to elaborate. The villagers whispered about Reed's shaken demeanor, and I wondered if he'd write the story or bury it. Elias's abilities were no longer just a curiosity. They were a force that unsettled even the most cynical minds. By now, Elias's fame had reached the Vatican, and a papal envoy named Monsignor Ricci arrived. I was surprised. The church rarely sent officials to remote villages. Ricci was stern, his Latin polished but cautious, as if testing for heresy. Elias responded with passages from Augustine, his voice steady and reverent. I noticed Ricci's hands tighten around his crucifix as the boy spoke. The Monsignor later confided to me that Elias's Latin was too pure, untouched by the church's medieval adaptations. This wasn't just a linguistic marvel. It was a theological puzzle. I asked Elias about his faith, and he quoted scripture in a way that felt both ancient and alive. Ricci left without declaring a miracle, his report sealed for Rome. The villagers were in awe, but I saw fear in their eyes. Elias was becoming a figure they couldn't understand, and I wondered how long their reverence would last. A philosopher named Gustav Klein, known for his treatises on the human mind, was next. I'd read his work and respected his rational approach, so I was curious about his take on Elias. Klein questioned the boy in Latin about abstract concepts, time, eternity, the soul. Elias's responses were profound, weaving Plato with Christian theology in ways no child could invent. I saw Klein's eyes widen as he scribbled notes, his usual calm replaced by agitation. He told me later that Elias's answers suggested a mind unbound by time. I didn't know what to make of that, but it sent a shiver down my spine. The villagers began avoiding Elias, their awe turning to suspicion. I stayed close, documenting every word, every reaction. Klein's visit left me with more questions than answers, and I began to wonder if Elias was more than human. The eighth responder was a local teacher, Miss Eleanor Gray, who taught Elias basic arithmetic. I knew her as a kind but practical woman, skeptical of miracles. She spoke to Elias in simple Latin, testing his knowledge of grammar. He corrected her gently, then launched into a recitation of Catullus's poetry. Eleanor's face flushed with embarrassment, then awe. She told me later that Elias had never shown such ability in her classes. I asked if she taught him Latin, and she swore she hadn't. The villagers now whispered of possession, their fear outweighing their wonder. I felt it too, a growing unease that Elias's gift wasn't a gift at all. Eleanor's reaction confirmed what I'd suspected. This wasn't learned behavior. It was something else, something that defied explanation. A wealthy patron, Lord Edmund Carver, arrived next, drawn by tales of a prodigy. I didn't trust his intentions. He seemed more interested in fame than truth. He spoke to Elias in Latin, offering to fund his education if he performed. Elias declined with a quote from Seneca about the dangers of pride. Carver laughed, but I saw irritation in his eyes. He wasn't used to being refused, especially by a child. I noted how Elias's words carried a quiet authority, as if he'd lived 100 lives. The villagers began to shun the schoolhouse, fearing Elias's growing influence. Carver left, promising to return with scholars to study the boy. I doubted his motives, but couldn't deny his reaction. Elias had humbled him. The boy's Latin wasn't just skill, it was power. The final responder in this first wave was a mystic named Madame Isolde, who claimed to sense ancient energies. I was skeptical of her theatrics, but intrigued by her reputation. She spoke to Elias in Latin, her voice trembling with excitement. He responded with a passage from Lucretius, his tone calm but piercing. Isolde gasped, claiming his aura was tied to eternity. I didn't believe in auras, but her reaction was undeniable. She was terrified. The villagers now avoided Elias entirely, and I felt the weight of their fear. Isolde's visit left me questioning my own skepticism. Was Elias connected to something beyond our understanding? I stayed in the village, determined to find out, as more responders were already on their way. The second wave began with Dr. Samuel Holt, a physician studying the mind. I'd read his theories on prodigy and madness, so I was eager to see his approach. He examined Elias, asking him to recite Latin while he measured his pulse. Elias complied, quoting Livy with a steady heartbeat. Holt's instruments showed nothing unusual, yet his face betrayed confusion. He told me Elias's mind operated beyond normal limits, but he couldn't explain how. I asked Elias about his thoughts during these recitations, and he said, "I just know." The villagers now locked their doors at night, fearing the boy's presence. Holt's reaction deepened my unease. Science was failing to explain Elias. I began to wonder if we were asking the wrong questions, looking for answers in the wrong places. A linguist named Professor Anna Weber arrived next, her expertise in dead languages unmatched. I admired her precision and hoped she'd uncover Elias's source. She tested him with rare Latin texts, ones only scholars knew. Elias not only read them, but discussed their historical context with chilling accuracy. Weber's composure broke. She admitted his knowledge surpassed her own. I saw her hands shake as she packed her books, muttering about impossible memory. The villagers' fear grew, and some began calling Elias a curse. I asked him if he felt different, and he said, "I'm just me." His simplicity was disarming, but Weber's reaction lingered, a scholar humbled by a child. I wrote to my mentor again, urging more experts to come. The 13th responder was a historian, Dr. Felix Moreau, who specialized in Roman antiquity. I expected him to be skeptical, but he approached Elias with reverence. He asked the boy about Rome's fall, and Elias answered in Latin, describing events with vivid detail. Moreau's eyes lit up, but his excitement turned to unease when Elias mentioned unrecorded details, names, dates, battles. I saw Moreau cross-reference his notes, finding no trace of Elias's claims. He whispered to me that the boy's knowledge was too specific, too real. The villagers now refused to speak Elias's name, their fear turning to hostility. I felt it too, a growing dread that Elias knew things no one should. Moreau left, promising to research further, but his face told me he was shaken. A poet named Julian Blackwood came next, drawn by rumors of a divine child. I was skeptical of his romantic notions, but curious about his perspective. He spoke to Elias in Latin, asking about beauty and truth. Elias responded with verses from Horace, his voice soft but commanding. Blackwood wept, calling the boy a muse reborn. I found his reaction excessive, but his tears were real. The villagers, now openly hostile, began petitioning to remove Elias from the school. I asked Blackwood why he was so moved, and he said Elias's words carried the weight of ages. I couldn't shake the feeling that the poet saw something I didn't. Elias remained calm, but I sensed he knew the village was turning against him. The 15th responder was a skeptic named Margaret Lane, a scientist who studied child prodigies. I respected her rigor and hoped she'd find a rational explanation. She tested Elias with logic puzzles in Latin, expecting him to stumble. He solved them effortlessly, then recited Plautus with theatrical flair. Lane's skepticism wavered. She admitted his abilities defied her theories. I asked her if Elias could be a fraud, and she shook her head, saying, "No one could fake this." The villagers now avoided the school entirely, and I heard whispers of exile. Lane's reaction confirmed what I feared. Elias was beyond science's grasp. I began to question my own assumptions, wondering if I was chasing a truth too vast to comprehend. A theologian named Brother Matthias arrived, sent by a nearby monastery. I expected dogma, but he was gentle, asking Elias about faith in Latin. The boy responded with Augustine's Confessions, his voice filled with conviction. Matthias wept, calling it a sign of God's presence. I wasn't so sure. Elias's words felt too ancient, too detached from modern faith. The villagers' hostility grew, and some threw stones at the schoolhouse. I asked Matthias if Elias could be divine, and he hesitated, saying, "He's something else." His uncertainty mirrored my own. The boy's Latin was no longer just a skill. It was a force that divided the village. I stayed close to Elias, fearing for his safety. The 17th responder was a linguist named Dr. Isabella Ruiz, who studied language acquisition in children. I hoped her expertise would clarify Elias's gift. She spoke to him in Latin, testing his vocabulary and syntax. Elias answered with such precision that Ruiz called it inhumanly perfect. I saw her notes pile up, filled with question marks. She told me his Latin showed no signs of modern influence. It was as if he'd learned it in ancient Rome. The villagers now spoke of burning the schoolhouse, their fear turning to rage. I asked Elias if he was afraid, and he said, "They don't understand." Ruiz's reaction left me reeling. Her science couldn't explain him, and neither could I. A nobleman named Count Dietrich von Hesse arrived, drawn by tales of a prodigy. I distrusted his wealth and arrogance, but his Latin was impeccable. He questioned Elias about Roman law, expecting to stump him. Elias replied with detailed knowledge of Justinian's code, leaving the Count speechless. I saw Dietrich's pride crumble, replaced by awe. He offered to take Elias to his estate, but the boy refused with a quote from Cicero about freedom. The villagers' anger boiled over, and I heard plans to drive Elias out. Dietrich left, promising to send scholars, but his eyes betrayed fear. I wondered if Elias's Latin was a gift or a curse, and why it provoked such extreme reactions. The 19th responder was a folklorist named Agnes Cole, who studied ancient myths. I was intrigued by her unique perspective, hoping she'd see Elias as a living legend. She spoke to him in Latin, asking about old gods and rituals. Elias described Roman rites with chilling accuracy, details no child could know. Cole's face paled. She said his knowledge echoed lost oral traditions. I asked if he could be connected to ancient spirits, and she didn't laugh. She nodded. The villagers now called Elias a sorcerer, their fear turning to violence. Cole's reaction deepened my unease. She saw Elias as a bridge to a forgotten past. I began to wonder if his Latin was a voice from history itself. The final responder in this wave was a mathematician named Professor Karl Braun, who saw language as a form of logic. I hoped his analytical mind would demystify Elias. He tested the boy with Latin riddles, expecting to find a pattern. Elias solved them instantly, then recited Euclid in Latin, blending math and language seamlessly. Braun's logic failed him. He called Elias a paradox. I asked the boy how he knew so much, and he said, "It's just there." The villagers' rage peaked, and I heard whispers of a mob forming. Braun left, muttering about impossible cognition. I stayed with Elias, feeling the weight of his mystery. His Latin was no longer just words. It was a window into something vast and unknowable. The third wave began with a psychologist named Dr. Evelyn Hart, who studied unexplained phenomena. I was skeptical but desperate for answers. She observed Elias, asking him to recite Latin under stress. He performed flawlessly, his voice steady as ever. Hart's test showed no signs of delusion or coaching. Elias was simply himself. She told me his mind was a singularity, defying all known models. The villagers now gathered nightly, their torches casting shadows on the schoolhouse. I asked Elias if he felt trapped, and he quoted Seneca, "Fate leads the willing." Hart's reaction shook me. She saw Elias as a psychological anomaly, yet she couldn't explain him. I began to fear for his safety, sensing the village's anger nearing a breaking point. A classicist named Professor Lionel Gray arrived, his expertise in Roman literature unmatched. I hoped he'd pinpoint Elias' source. He tested the boy with obscure texts, ones only scholars knew. Elias not only recited them, but added commentary that stunned Gray. The professor called it living Latin, untouched by centuries of change. I saw Gray's hands tremble as he packed his books, muttering about historical impossibilities. The villagers' mob grew bolder, shouting curses outside the school. I asked Elias why he didn't hide, and he said, "I speak what I know." Gray's reaction confirmed my fears. Elias's Latin wasn't just skill, it was a connection to a lost world. The 23rd responder was a bishop named Roland de Vere, sent by the church to investigate. I expected judgment, but he was kind, speaking to Elias in Latin about salvation. The boy responded with Augustine's words, his voice filled with quiet power. De Vere wept, calling it a miracle, but his superiors demanded caution. I saw fear in his eyes. Elias's Latin challenged the church's authority. The villagers mobbed now threw stones, and I barricaded the schoolhouse door. I asked de Vere if Elias was divine, and he said, "He's beyond us." The bishop's reaction deepened the mystery. Elias was no longer just a boy. He was a force that shook faith itself. A linguist named Dr. Sofia Alvarez arrived, her work on ancient phonetics renowned. I hoped she'd explain Elias's accent. She recorded him speaking Latin, analyzing every syllable. Her equipment showed his pronunciation matched no modern dialect. It was pure, ancient, alive. Alvarez called it a linguistic fossil, impossible in a living person. I asked Elias how he spoke so clearly, and he said, "I hear it in my mind." The villagers' mob grew violent, demanding Elias's exile. Alvarez left, her tapes clutched tightly, her face pale with awe. I felt the weight of her findings. Elias's Latin wasn't just learned. It was innate, as if Rome itself spoke through him. The 25th responder was a skeptic named Dr. Henry Walsh, who debunked supernatural claims. I didn't trust his cynicism but welcomed his scrutiny. He questioned Elias in Latin, mixing in deliberate errors. The boy corrected him instantly, then recited Sallust with perfect cadence. Walsh's confidence crumbled. He admitted he found no fraud. I saw fear in his eyes, a rare crack in his skepticism. The villagers' mob now surrounded the schoolhouse, their shouts deafening. I asked Walsh if Elias could be a hoax, and he said, "He's too real." His reaction chilled me. Elias was no trick, but something far stranger. I stayed by his side, knowing the mob was closing in. A historian named Professor Maria Stein arrived, her focus on Roman culture. I hoped she'd contextualize Elias's knowledge. She asked him about daily life in Rome, and he described it with vivid detail: markets, temples, even smells. Stein's notes overflowed, but she found no historical inaccuracies. She called Elias a living archive, but her voice trembled with unease. The villagers' mob now lit fires, their hatred unstoppable. I asked Elias if he feared them, and he quoted Virgil, "Fear is for the ignorant." Stein's reaction haunted me. Her scholarship couldn't explain him, and neither could I. The boy's Latin was a bridge to a past we'd lost. The 27th responder was a philosopher named Dr. Paul Durand, who studied human potential. I hoped his perspective would clarify Elias's mind. He spoke to the boy in Latin about existence and knowledge. Elias responded with Plato, his words weaving ancient and modern thought. Durand called it transcendent cognition, beyond human limits. The villagers' mob now broke windows, their rage uncontainable. I asked Durand if Elias was a genius, and he said, "He's more than that." His reaction left me reeling. Elias wasn't just gifted, he was otherworldly. I barred the door, fearing the mob would reach him soon. A priest named Father Lorenzo arrived, sent by a distant diocese. I expected dogma, but he was curious, asking Elias about God in Latin. The boy quoted Tertullian, his voice calm but piercing. Lorenzo knelt, calling it a divine gift, but his eyes showed doubt. The villagers' mob now chanted for Elias's death. Their fear turned to bloodlust. I asked Lorenzo if the boy was holy, and he said, "He's beyond holiness." The priest's reaction shook me. Elias's Latin challenged even the sacred. I stayed with him, knowing the mob was moments away. His calm demeanor was unnerving, as if he knew something I didn't. The 29th responder was a linguist named Dr. Rachel Cohen, who studied language origins. I hoped she'd trace Elias's Latin to its source. She tested him with Proto-Latin forms, expecting confusion. Elias not only understood but corrected her reconstructions. Cohen called it a linguistic impossibility, her voice trembling. The villagers' mob now battered the schoolhouse door, their torches lighting the night. I asked Elias if he was afraid, and he said, "I speak what must be spoken." Cohen's reaction confirmed my fears. His Latin was a relic, alive in a way it shouldn't be. I held the door, praying for time, but the mob was relentless. The final responder was me. I'd watched scholars, priests, and skeptics falter before Elias, and now I faced him alone. I spoke to him in Latin, asking who he was. He answered with a line from Cicero, "I am what I am, and that is enough." The mob broke through, their shouts drowning his voice. I tried to protect him, but they pulled him away, their fear too great. His Latin echoed in my mind, perfect and ancient, as they dragged him into the night. I never saw him again, but his words stayed with me, a mystery unsolved. Who was Elias, and why did his Latin shake the world? I still search for answers, haunted by the boy who spoke a dead language as if it were alive. If this story of Elias and his impossible Latin captivated you, join me on this journey to uncover more mysteries. Subscribe to my channel for weekly dives into the strange and unexplained. Hit that button, share your thoughts in the comments, and let's explore the unknown together. Don't miss the next tale. Who knows what truths we'll find?